Last week, Friday, we put in place at the Ministry of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs, along with the Ministry of National Security, a team that included the ODPM, the Defense Force, Caribbean Airlines and Immigration to assist with finding out, first of all, how many of our nationals were affected, and in particular in the islands of St. Martin and the British Virgin Islands, in particular Tortola. And then after ascertaining how many of our nationals were affected, what was their status, we then put in place various operations to try and get as many of them back to Trinidad and Tobago, but in the first instance, to get them to safe accommodation in Antigua. At this stage, we'd like to publicly thank the government of Antigua for working along with us very closely and for a very productive and good cooperative relationship over the past week. As you all would recall, the government of Trinidad and Tobago took the initiative and provided the government of Antigua and Barbuda with one of our national helicopter services helicopters. We got it to Antigua, we then gave them 40 flying hours, and then it will be returned to Trinidad and Tobago. Over the past week, we have been in constant contact with the government of Antigua many times during the course of the day. First of all, in successfully airlifting Trinidad and Tobago nationals from St. Martin, which at the time and in the initial days after Hurricane Irma had passed through, was suffering from a breakdown in law and order. We managed to make contact with some of our nationals there. They were evacuated from the Juliana airport over on the Dutch side. We were in contact with the authorities on both the French and the Dutch side. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the public servants at the Ministry of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs and at the Ministry of National Security, those who worked with us from CAL, Immigration, ODPM, and the Defense Force for successfully pulling together operations where, along with the government of Antigua, we repatriated or evacuated our nationals from St. Martin to Antigua. The government of Antigua then accommodated them in hotel, provided medical attention where they needed, food and clothes, and we expect today one of the flights, a CAL flight, to bring home a number of our nationals from Antigua back to Trinidad and Tobago. Yesterday, we had a very successful operation where a Caribbean Airlines plane, an ATR, left Trinidad in the early afternoon around 1:35 p.m., flew to Tortola. The only flights that are being accommodated in Tortola right now are military flights and humanitarian relief aid. We managed, in working along with the British government, and we thank them for a limited space for us to fly into the airport there. We managed to evacuate 35 of our most needy nationals from Tortola. They arrived successfully last night at around 7:30 p.m. at Piarco, Trinidad. And by all accounts, that operation went very well. We continue to be in contact. We expect some more nationals to be flown today from St. Martin to Antigua, and in time, or if not in time, for them to then be flown home. There are commercial flights from Antigua to Trinidad and Tobago, so we ask our nationals who are there to make their way home via these commercial flights. We are collaborating closely with the French, Dutch and British government to ascertain in St. Martin and Tortola when commercial flights will be reopened and the ability for commercial flights to fly there and bring home other nationals. Unfortunately, we had one tragic circumstance where a national of Trinidad and Tobago who flies to St. Martin, who used to fly to St. Martin to look after her grandchild, met some very tragic circumstances in trying to leave the home that she was at in St. Martin and go to safer accommodation in the midst of Hurricane Irma. And unfortunately, herself and her grandchild lost their life. Today, we'd like to announce that the government of Trinidad and Tobago has heard the plea for help in bringing the bodies back home, or the body back home, and we are going to make all attempts to facilitate that and to assist, first of all, in hopefully having the bodies removed from St. Martin to Antigua. We will be reaching out to the government of Antigua through our diplomatic lines, channels of communication, to then see if they can assist us in getting the bodies back home from Antigua to Trinidad and Tobago. The Ministry of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs will transmit this information to the family. Please again accept our great sympathy and our condolences, and in this time of mourning, the government of Trinidad and Tobago is going to make all of its very best efforts to assist the family in this time of need in terms of getting the body or bodies back to Trinidad and Tobago. So we would like to say that we believe that the operations have been successful. It was a very, very difficult point in time because communications were down in those islands. So even communicating with persons who were in Tortola and in St. Martin was very, very difficult. We've gotten one of our lieutenant colonels on the ground in Tortola, Lieutenant Colonel Weeks. We'd like to thank him for the work he's been doing on the ground. Families who are in Trinidad and Tobago and outside of Trinidad and Tobago who have been corresponding with the Ministry of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs, I ask that you all continue to do so because that is where the information flows from. So at this stage, we thank everyone for all of the assistance, and in particular the public servants and those who worked assiduously and tirelessly to assist the government of Trinidad and Tobago in those successful operations, which will be continuing. This morning we were contacted by private sector. They want to know about taking goods and supplies up to these islands now and what can be done. Again, we expect the private sector to drive those relief efforts. If in fact a government Coast Guard vessel is going to be going up, at this stage we've taken no such decision. We will of course make that known and we will take up whatever supplies we can at that stage. But so far a week has passed, just under a week, because the operation started last week Friday, and I think the government of Trinidad and Tobago has done a very good job, and we'd like to thank everybody who made it that bit much easier and the coordination that took place in the past week. I can answer any questions about that afterwards, and I now ask the Honourable Prime Minister to come to the podium and he will make himself available to members of the media as he so promised. Thank you.
Good afternoon, members of the media. Good afternoon, members of the national viewing and listening public. Last night we had a very successful and useful public conversation out at St. Augustine. It was open to the wider national community, but mainly for persons in that area. And I'm very grateful for the involvement of the large body of media personnel who spent their evening monitoring and reporting on that event, informing the national public of the actions and positions of the government of Trinidad and Tobago. I did at that time, getting into the late evening, mention to the media that I'm sure you may have a few questions for me on matters of interest which are topical at this time. And since you weren't in a position last night to put those questions to me, I now make myself available for whatever questions you might have wanted to ask me last night, or any other reasonable question for which I may have an answer which might be of benefit to the public. So for the first time, I didn't bring anything to the press conference. I'm here at your disposal. So the floor is yours. Let's start with the man in front.
Well, I wanted to pick up on the moratorium which was agreed to yesterday between yourself and the trade unions regarding public sector retrenchment and so on. I just wanted to ask you, how successful would a measure like that be if we're only talking public sector, but there's no real buy-in by the private sector not to do the same thing? And given that this is all an attempt to try to bring NTAC back on track and so on, given our current economic circumstances, how effective would you say, my question is, how effective would this moratorium be for public sector jobs not being cut, but we still have but there's no encouragement for the private sector to do the same thing?
Issue of whether it was useful to have entered into that arrangement is, yes, it was useful, because the best position to be in is for the tripartite arrangement to be operational and to contribute to national discourse and national development. It does not serve the national interest for Labour to take the position that its best place is outside on the streets, shouting at the government and making proposals to itself and to others without those proposals being examined and received in an environment of civility where the merits of such proposals and their input can be made available so that the nation benefits from that tripartite discussion. Now, the Labour's position at the first meeting we had, as you may recall, yesterday was the second of two meetings, and when Labour came at the first meeting, their position was that they wanted a moratorium on the mass layoffs and retrenchments that are taking place in the country, both in the private sector and the public sector. Well, of course, government's position was that that phrase of mass layoff and retrenchment, as expressed by Labour, is hyperbole, because there's no such thing happening in Trinidad and Tobago. The government's policy has been to put people first, to ensure even in our difficult situation that even though it is a strain on what we are trying to do, we try to keep as many people in jobs as possible. Government has more control in the public sector and little control in the private sector. So Labour's request to us to get the private sector to not engage in retrenchment and layoff is but a request which we can't enforce. The private sector will make those decisions. But government did say, and I, very early in the game, appealed to the private sector, saying that we would expect that in the understanding and the spirit of sharing the burden of adjustment, that the private sector would not resort to layoffs and retrenchment as the simple and primary way to deal with any challenges that we may have now as the economy is contracting in the way it is. And in the government sector, the record will show that the government has not engaged in a policy of mass layoff and retrenchment, as the Labour says. So that was part of the discussion in the first meeting. Yesterday's meeting, Labour's position was that they would like the government to not initiate new aspects of retrenchment in the next 3 to 4 months, September to December. And the government didn't have a difficulty with that, because if we are following a policy of not using retrenchment and layoffs as a budget balancing measure, we didn't have a difficulty. And Labour raised a number of issues surrounding NTAC, and if that was the basis on which they will participate in national discourse, the government didn't have a difficulty in agreeing to that. So it does not in any way impede in any significant activity which the government had anticipated, nor does it at all circumscribe the government's authority in determining what goes on in the areas of public sector employment. And if it is that the government, in fact, it was even raised that if an emergency situation arises, that we will discuss such an emergency during that period. But it was an understanding that we are all, both Labour and the government, we are focused on trying to ensure that job losses are minimized, because the government's objective of maintaining economic and social stability is rooted in ensuring that people have opportunities to work and to earn and to put food on their table and to live a fairly decent life, even though we are going through what is accepted by, I think, the larger part of the national community, that this is an unusually difficult period requiring some difficult decisions.
A few weeks ago, you spoke about the government having to borrow money to pay public servants. In the context of the NTAC and the demands by trade unions for wage increases, can you tell us now what the government's position is with regard to public sector wage negotiations?
Well, let me just touch on the point of borrowing money to pay wages. That is in the context, or I want you to take that in the context of the fungibility of funds. You don't ascribe a particular banknote to a particular expenditure. The government has a series of expenditure liabilities and requirements, whether it is paying the public debt, whether it is paying for medicine in the hospital, whether it is paying back pay, whatever. And if the government doesn't have a pool of money that is sufficient to discharge all these responsibilities, it borrows to ensure that it can pay the public. When the check is ready for the public debt, it can go out. When the check is ready for the hospital medicine, that check can go out. When the check goes out for the back pay, it can go out, and so on. So it is in that context that you should take my statement about borrowing to pay salaries. Because when you borrow, it goes into a pot of money, and it gives you the ability to deal with those things that you have to spend money on. And the other point you asked was, it slipped me, wage freeze. Public sector negotiation. Yes, which is quite different to wage freeze, right? Yes, that the whole status of public sector negotiation formed part of the discussion we had with the labor movement, because a peculiar thing happened, which I think the public should know. There were a number of outstanding, or I should say there are always a number of outstanding negotiations, particularly in the public sector, where workers who look towards an agreement may expire, a new one comes into force, and the negotiations drag on from one into the other and so on. And in the end, there's some settlement that takes place, and some back pay is paid, and the process rolls over again. That is how it has been. What happened in 2010 into 2015 is that labor, particularly the OWTU, got involved in the politics of the UNC and became a partner in the government. And soon after that government's rampage started, the MSJ pulled out of the UNC coalition. And peculiarly, you would have heard UNC spokespersons boast on many occasions about how many negotiations they had settled, how many hundred negotiations they had settled. Of course, that was just a lot of hogwash, because there was never any hundreds of negotiations settled. But what they were not talking about at all is that they penalized the OWTU by not settling the negotiations where the OWTU was the bargaining unit. The settlements that occurred were for other unions, and a lot of outstanding ones in the public sector where the OWTU was the bargaining unit, those were left unattended. Those now fell to this government to be concluded. And it is out of that arrangement that came the strike action that was threatened in December into January this year, where this government, in treating with that, Petrotrin started out with a 0-0 offer, because between then and now, significant changes had occurred with respect to the state's ability to give its employees significant increases. And the OWTU's position to this government was that they were being made to pay a political price, and they were being penalized because their bargaining units were discriminated against by the last government through no fault of their own, as they would say. But other persons, other state workers had got 14%. And here it is that this government is offering 0-0-0. However, they settled, we got a settlement, I think it was 5%, and that settled the OWTU matter at Petrotrin. But there are a number of other outstanding matters which are still there in the public sector. I think COSTAT, if my memory serves me right, UWI somewhere, the non-academic staff in UWI, UTT. Yeah, a number of outstanding matters. We did settle Tech as well under the terms of this government. But those OWTU negotiations were literally frozen until the government changed. We only settled Tech and maybe one other. The others are there. We have impressed upon the union that notwithstanding what happened, as I just described, in the political arena, the bottom line is that we cannot just simply undertake to make good what the last government didn't do. We have to deal now with what is in front of us, and that is negotiations in front of us and a government's ability to give its employees increases, significant increases. From the conversations we've had, and you would have heard the leader of the labor movement of the grouping yesterday, saying, and more than one of the leaders were saying that after the discussions, which were quite cordial, I must say, and if I may go a little further and say reasonable, we are hearing the labor movement saying now that they are not pressing for wage increases, but there are other kinds of considerations that government could make which would give some kind of benefit to the workers, and they are open to discussing all of those things, but they were annoyed that the discussions were not taking place and advancing to some situation, because we do have a system where the workers expect to be reviewed every 3 years, and if you don't have cash to offer pay increases, you may have something else. For example, this morning at this cabinet today, we discussed the whole one aspect of some the medical insurance arrangements which are in place, but which needed to be increased and bolstered. That is something that we could do, which is a benefit to workers without it being a pay increase, but it's a kind some element of cost to the state. So those discussions are the kinds of discussions that need to take place in the tripartite arrangement of NTAC. And the government is encouraging labor to be a part of the solution and not to be a part of the problem. And insofar as the agreement was made yesterday, it was towards that end. And we expect that NTAC will resume its operations very soon, and we'll have more frequent meetings, and we will restructure the management of NTAC so that there'll be a greater comfort to those who participate in it. So that is where is it with labor.
How bad is the country's economic situation?
I don't want to speak about how bad it is. I want to speak about how much progress.
How good is it?
Not very good, because I don't know if you heard me last night. I mentioned if we compare our situation where we were at peak earnings in 2008, we had become a gas exporting country. We were exporting a fair amount of gas. Having built the LNG plant in this country, that was a major, major development which allowed us to monetize our gas. It was not the normal thing in the world to have a small LNG plant like that. But when we built that in Train 1 in Trinidad and Tobago, we put this country on an earning stream that was very significant, and then we got the other streams coming on. And the earnings from LNG, in a time when the price of LNG was very good, the cost per unit was well over $10 per unit, per MMBTU, for a period of time, which resulted in 2008 being the best earning year in the history of this country. And we had enough money to spend to do what we wanted to do and to put into savings. Fortunately, we saved some of that money in our Heritage and Stabilization Fund, and we spent on all kinds of infrastructure and, of course, expenditure on personnel who work for the government and so on. And, of course, we had a good market, the US Eastern Seaboard and Europe. We were a significant player in there because in those days we were out front in LNG export. Subsequent to that, a number of other countries have jumped into the LNG business on scales much larger than us. Some have much larger reserves than we have. And in fact, the market now is very different. The price is now usually under $3. The market now is being shared by those who bought from us before. The US market was one of our best markets. The US is now an exporter of gas. And of course, our own volume of gas would have contracted in a situation where in 2013 some contracts came for renewal and were left on month to month. I don't know if this country was aware of that. I said it before, but people in this country don't listen on some occasions, or I don't make myself clear, or the government doesn't make itself clear. But we here in this country are partying very merrily, while our lifeblood, Point Lisa's plants, were on month-to-month contracts. And some had reached the point of closing their business and their operation. Not to mention that the external markets had collapsed in terms of the price we were earning out there. So between our own gas, our own oil, having lower values, those companies where we get profits, tax to give us additional revenues, they had those difficulties. And of course, while that was going on, we had some merriment going on. We were spending record budgets every year. The national budget in Trinidad and Tobago, against the background of what I just said, on the revenue side, the expenditure side was growing from 47 billion or 45 billion in 2010, and every single budget, 2011, 2012, 2013, 2014, 2015, every single budget was an increase until we got to $63 billion. And then the market collapsed. The price of oil fell from $90 down to $28 in a period of months. It moved back up slowly again over a period of months, and it has now become pretty much mired at about $40 or $42. And we don't get the full amount that's quoted because our land crude gets a bit less than that. And it has remained there. And the price of gas also fell to $2.79, $2.99. A few days might go to $3.05, but that's where gas is. And at the same time, we had suffered significant shortages of gas because the gas producers in this country had literally dug their heels in and were saying that they would not invest until there's an agreement on a gas price in Trinidad and Tobago. And fortunately, the government changed. We came in, and one of the priority things we did was to engage those companies in discussions on the establishment of a gas price, which could see all parties agreeing on a gas contract. NGC led that with the Cabinet Subcommittee on Energy, the Motley Committee, and we got to the point where we were close, but unfortunately we're not getting an agreement. That is when I went to Houston with Minister Young and sat down with the decision makers, not the in-between middlemen, but the decision makers in those companies at BP and Shell and elsewhere, and EOG, and we got an agreement where NGC could be happy, and the companies could be happy, and the government could be happy. And that was a significant development, because having got that gas price, it immediately opened the door for $10 billion of investment over a 5-year period to commence in Trinidad and Tobago. That is going on right now. And from that perspective, the gas supply has begun to improve, because we got some new gas coming in, and a lot of work is going on and investment being made to ensure that that pillar where the gas shortage was threatening us, as we go forward into the medium term and of course into the long term, we want to remain as a gas producing and gas selling country. It could easily have been different. And against that background, we still have the other difficulty of the current reduction on the revenue side, because as you will learn in the coming days, that there are some arrangements in place in this whole gas selling and gas contracting and gas producing business where we did not cover ourselves in glory, and the end result of that is that while some people's horses might be getting fat, our horse might be starving. And we have to rectify that, and we are in some serious discussions now with the gas companies to ensure that there is significant benefit coming to the people of Trinidad and Tobago from this particular industry upon which we depend. Let me just address another point which is very common. There's a particular commentator who makes a career of ridiculing the government for relying on the hydrocarbon sector. In the foreseeable future, we in Trinidad and Tobago know of nothing else that can remotely give us the kinds of revenue that we had become accustomed to and that we need and that we anticipate to maintain the quality of life and the standard of living in Trinidad and Tobago. Yes, we are looking towards diversification, meaning doing additional things, but that does not mean that we let go on the one thing that is guaranteed to give us at least a fair shot at maintaining some modicum of what we had become accustomed to. We certainly cannot continue to spend and to behave on the basis of what we had become accustomed to in the period 2010 or even 28 going forward, 27, even as far as 26. We are in a very unique situation. We've had a period of good revenues coming in from 2003 all the way to 2015, early part of 2015 or 2014, late part. That has changed considerably. And we are the government now during that period, and this is what we have to deal with. So comparisons with what happened before and who was given baby milk and who was given this and who was given that is just so much nonsense. We are now awakened. We are no longer asleep to our difficulties. We are awakened and we are addressing those things. You know, I was a little surprised at the silence of the energy voices in this country on two counts. One, when we got the breakthrough in Venezuela to get the Venezuelan government, it matters not who they are. The government of Venezuela is a matter for the people of Venezuela. But the government of Trinidad and Tobago was able to get the government of Venezuela to agree to allow Venezuelan gas, not cross-border gas, Venezuelan gas fields, the Dragon field, to be considered as part of Trinidad and Tobago's reserves, to have access to it on commercial arrangements. And I didn't hear a comment in Trinidad and Tobago from the energy voices, not the least the past ministers and others, and those who appoint themselves to give us advice as to what we should or shouldn't do. That is a major breakthrough because it secures our future with respect to having gas available to be a gas processing and a gas marketing country. And here, if we have access to gas that is not within our border, but we're still in the business. That's the Japanese model. Japan became the biggest exporter of motor cars in the world, not having an iron ore reserve. But they use somebody else's iron ore. Brazilian iron ore gave us a steel industry in Trinidad and Tobago. And if we got access to Venezuelan Dragon field, that gives us the opportunity to be in this gas business for a long time.
What happens if the Maduro government becomes the former Maduro administration?
Well, if you understand what this means, we have standing plant in Trinidad and Tobago. We have Point Lisas. So it doesn't matter who is in Venezuela. There's an interest in Point Lisas for processing and marketing Venezuelan gas, whether you are in the opposition or whether you're in the government. That's the key to this whole thing. Right? And the agreement is with the government of Trinidad and Tobago and not Maduro, as the opposition is saying in Trinidad. I mean, we are very disappointed in the opposition's perspective of this matter. And they've been moving heaven and earth, right, to encourage people in Venezuela not to cooperate with this. So far, knock wood, the people of Venezuela, whether they're in the government or the opposition, they have seen the business relationship that this particular initiative engenders for Trinidad and Tobago and for Venezuela. Because what it allows Venezuela to do is to market gas, which is largely stranded. And that gas is near to Trinidad and Tobago. We even have plant and pipeline. We have platform and pipeline, which will allow the Venezuelans to bring that gas to market, a place where they now have no place, because they do not have an LNG plant. And we have LNG plants here. So that allows Venezuela to market its gas by way of Trinidad and Tobago. These models exist elsewhere in the world, and to have that done in Trinidad and pass on notice is something quite significant. The other thing was the gas price. Without an agreement on that gas price, we would have been going down the road of plants closing in Point Lisas and being taken elsewhere, because North America is now attractive for these industries in a way that they have not been encouraged for the last 40 or 50 years, from the point of view of price and availability of gas. And the politics in North America has changed drastically, encouraging these industries within the US border. And that is the time when Trinidad and Tobago had to get up. And let me say this, for all the scribes and Pharisees who want to say this government this and this government that, I gather we scored 1 point and 1 out of 10 on somebody's scale recently. And we only got that 1, I hope, for what I just told you. Because if this government does nothing else in the rest of its term, what I just told you would have been worth the change of government.
It's changed a bit, so it's slightly related to Petrotrin and dealing with our hydrocarbon resources. as well. The issue of Petrotrin being allegedly defrauded of quite a substantial sum of money in terms of its production. There are links being made as well to the People's National Movement. I just wanted to first of all get your reaction to what has taken place there, the allegation, and to also deal with your alleged links to one of the persons involved, one Mr. Hannigbach. Do you have a relationship with him?
There are so many places I could start. Let me start on this, and the place where it should start. If any person or entity has committed any act of illegality, whether it is fraud or whatever, against Petrotrin or any other state enterprise, that should be of concern to every citizen of Trinidad and Tobago. It should not have a complexion of which political party is who. So if there is wrongdoing resulting, or let me just say wrongdoing in general, it is required to be of concern. It's against that background that we have taken the position that Petrotrin needs to be treated in a particular way and in a more serious way. In this particular instance, a preliminary report came out of Petrotrin from its audit department that a particular company may have been billing for more fluid, more oil than they would have produced. That particular issue, oil being so important to us, Petrotrin so important to us, must certainly be of concern to every citizen of Trinidad and Tobago, not just the government. Having said that, there is a way to treat with these things, especially if you want a successful outcome in responding to them. Firstly, where there are allegations of this nature, there's an imperative to find out what happened, who is responsible, and who should be held accountable. A preliminary report is what it says, preliminary. And the company in reporting to the minister, to the ministry, these preliminary findings indicate quite clearly that they have further work to do. And they will advise the minister when that further work is done. I have seen a copy of the document that went to the minister. I've seen that recently. And the ministry received that document on the 8th of August. The 8th of August, the ministry was advised that Petrotrin had this issue in front of it. And the preliminary report was seen at the ministry on the 8th of August. This report fell into the hands of the opposition leader. And I can't quarrel with the opposition leader, and I must not, for bringing this to the attention of the public and for seeking to make political mileage out of it, because the opposition, I spent 5 years in the opposition, and had I got that report, I would have brought it to the public attention as well. But you see, there's a limit to what you should do based on where you are at. When Petrotrin reported to the ministry, Petrotrin told the minister in that document that they had further work to do, that or another document. And the minister would have waited for Petrotrin to come back. Petrotrin came back, I am advised, on the 3 days, when is it?
The first one was the 8th, the second one is the 17th of September.
So 1 month later, 17th of September? No. 17th of August, Petrotrin came back with some further information, again saying that they have further work to do. And of course, I am advised that a final report of some kind, some final report has gone to the ministry, because I saw the PS at Parliament saying that they either received or are waiting a report. So basically, this was a work in progress. But we were all made aware by the opposition leader that Petrotrin had this issue, an issue which requires proper investigation and careful identification of to who is responsible. You see, it's not a matter of just getting ahead or getting somebody ahead the minister head or the prime minister head, because you could get as many heads. If the people responsible are not properly identified, then what has been happening in Trinidad and Tobago is that government change, board change, this, and the corruption continues. What we have been trying to do, whether it's at the port or at Petrotrin or elsewhere, is to identify the base and the source of the wrongdoing and hold the wrongdoers accountable. And it's against that background that we have said, we never said that we're not going to get involved or monitor what Petrotrin is doing. Petrotrin has a responsibility. And it just so happened that this report came out just at the same time that we were changing the board of Petrotrin. Because this government, as you may recall, I addressed the nation at the turn of the year, at the new year. I addressed the nation specifically on Petrotrin. So it's not to say that we were unaware that Petrotrin needs government nursemaiding. And we then proceeded to enter the company by way of review. And just at the time when this matter came out, from the company to the ministry, the cabinet was putting in place a new board. A new board was put in place last week, Friday, I think. Last week, Wednesday, cabinet took the decision to appoint a new board. I announced that decision on Friday morning, not because I was leaving the country, but because that was the first opportunity that was available to me to do so, because Thursday was a holiday. I saw a whole article written on that I had made the announcement of Petrotrin board and run out the country. People are so happy in this country that was the basis of a whole article, a whole column. But there was nothing sinister about it. By prior arrangement, I was supposed to leave the country on that day for reasons given, and the cabinet met until very late Wednesday afternoon, dealing with Petrotrin, of course, with respect to the matter of the board. So on Friday morning, after a holiday on Thursday, I announced, and again, I did it as against the minister because I was the one who addressed the nation on Petrotrin in January, and I told this to the media. So I was a little surprised to see that this was the subject of further discussion. However, the board has its audit arrangements and has to go into this matter. And because it has been so politicized, I would expect that the board will get independent inquiry into this matter. Because if the board comes up and says, well, we are this or we are that, there are those who will say it's a PNM appointed board and therefore the board has to say that. If the board uses its own internal arrangements to say we have done this and so on, they will say, well, of course, we haven't got the best of it. So for the country's peace and good order, I am hoping that the board of Petrotrin, which has on it some very experienced people, they will take the approach to have, as quickly as possible, independent investigation, the outcome of which is to very clearly identify conclusively who is responsible, what happened, and to hold those specific persons or entities accountable. And I said last night in that conversation in St. Augustine, it matters not who you are, whether you're PNM, MPN, or the alphabet. You are not to expect any protection from the government, and all citizens, wherever you may be located, if you engage in corruption, you're on your own. That's how it is. So let me go on to the behavior of the opposition leader in busing this mark, because she had had a pretty lean season under this government. Marks were very hard to bust. And she got this very interesting information, very useful to an opposition leader, and she played it for all it was worth. One, the allegation was being made against a company that the principal is a friend of the Prime Minister. Well, I want to tell the opposition leader that I'm very happy to hear that, because she spent a lifetime accusing me of racism. And I'm glad to know that she has now admitted I have a friend who is not of my race. And secondly, he's so much my friend that I'm teething oil with him for the PNM. That's her story. And of course, that the candidate of the PNM with whom I was photographed, that makes me culpable with whatever might be ascribed to his conduct at Petrotrin. Now, as PNM leader, I would be in great difficulty if I tell any PNM candidate that I don't want to be seen with you. So for those who are publishing a picture of me and a person who was a PNM candidate, that has nothing to do with me and Petrotrin oil. And by the same token, I made certain selections to the Senate, and I can tell you, those selections, none of them had anything to do with the individual's involvement in Petrotrin and his oil. And I heard certain scoldings coming to me from certain quarters that I should not carry some chip on my shoulder in dealing with this matter. I'm not carrying any chip. My shoulder is very square. But I do know from my own experience that very serious allegations can be made, and in those circumstances, all that is required to happen is proper, clear, and conclusive investigation. And let the facts be confirmed and let the chips fall where they may. To jump off on a preliminary inquiry and start accusing everybody who you know of being part of some grand conspiracy resulting in Petrotrin oil being stolen, to me, was a bit of an overreach. You could behave as an effective opposition leader. I think the country is better for that. But geometry is not really the way to deal with these things if you're going to get the best out of it. Because sometimes that kind of behavior in itself might be an impediment to getting to the root of the problem. Because once we make it politics, the miscreants might be happy, because if it becomes politics, then it's a question of all are we thief. I don't subscribe to that, and the PLM does not subscribe to that. What we are talking about is holding people accountable wherever they might be.
And you said geometry. Geometry. Was that the word you used?
I choose my words very carefully. I choose my word very carefully, right? Because if an employee of Petrotrin is found to have done something wrong with or without collusion of a contractor of Petrotrin, I don't know by what stretch of the imagination, right? I mean, you members of the media spent all of yesterday questioning me about my involvement in this matter. I don't know what possible involvement I could have in this matter, where Petrotrin is reporting that one of its operators, 100% under Petrotrin's control, is reporting that they've been buying oil that wasn't produced. What does that have to do with me? But of course, the opposition leader has to make sure it comes to me at the personal level, and I take that for what it is.
What do you say to people who may argue that if the votes were on the other foot, or if the political complexion of the company were different, that there would have been a more aggressive approach and commitments to, refer the matter to the fraud squad or the DPP?
Well, no, let's get clear. Let us understand, again, this is why I'm saying process. You don't just refer a matter to the fraud squad. If you have to have something to refer to the fraud squad. I just outlined, Petrotrin sent a preliminary report to the ministry. There are those who are thinking that that preliminary report should have been referred to the fraud squad, the DPP, and so on. I'm saying that is not what is done if you really want a proper result. Because if you refer that preliminary report to the fraud squad, when the fraud squad goes into Petrotrin, they have to go in there to talk to Petrotrin. And Petrotrin has to be in a position to assist the fraud squad in understanding the nature and the extent of the fraud. So you don't just refer it to the fraud squad because your boss a mark. Petrotrin is telling the minister, we have further work to do to confirm what we think we are saying. Right? There are allegations, denials, records, and no records. So this is a situation where Petrotrin has work to do, and if at the end of doing its work it comes to a conclusion that there's a matter to go to the fraud squad, then by all means we expect it to go to the fraud squad. But not go to the fraud squad while you are in a preliminary stage. And if it is confirmed, then certainly we expect, and as I'm saying now, I understand that there's a final report, and if the final report confirms what the preliminary report said, then it goes on to the fraud squad and wherever else you want to send it. And then if you know that the person who, if you know that you've heard that the Prime Minister is friendly with this person, okay, I'm the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, I have a lot of friends. I could tell you. I don't know what all of my friends will do all of the time, but I'm glad to know that there are people I can count among my friends. And of course, I must comment in this, but you asked me if it is on the other foot. The foot that is on now, okay, the Prime Minister is a friend of Mr. Bash, he said. I am not, if a person is my friend, I don't deny or disown them because an allegation is made against them. Being a friend means something, right? And we are all to be held accountable for our own individual conduct. And if it is expected that I will say, no, I don't know Mr. Bash, he's not my friend, then I will not do that, because I do not do that. I sat in front of a commission of inquiry, the offer inquiry, and senior counsel was asking me if Emily Elias was my friend. And I said yes. Because the case was being made that I was in cahoots with him for some allegation that was made by people who were... Anyway, the bottom line was, if a person is supposed to be my friend, and the person gets into difficulty of one kind or another, that is not the basis on which I will disown the person and say, I don't know the person. I'm not of that metal. And I will say to you, having said what I said about that particular issue, I would go further now and say, if this particular matter pans out, it raises greater and more serious concerns about what goes on in Petrotrin. Because this little operation in Cats Hill, if it turns out that this was going on there, I as a taxpayer, as Prime Minister, I would want to know what might be going on in the other areas of Petrotrin where millions of barrels of oil being bought from ships and sold into ships and so on and so on and so on. So you want to know that this kind of thing is not a feature of the operation of the company. And you may even want not just an investigation into this particular matter, but in the whole situation of Petrotrin's handling of these very, very large volumes of and expensive volumes of material. Wait, let's hear you, please.
And that is, are you concerned that there is a systemic failure on the part of the systems in the government to get people to pay what is due to the state, and that people have the capacity to systematically defraud the state, whether it's in the quarries section, or it's in oil, or it's in tax, or it's in whatever it is, that there is a failure, an almost breakdown in terms of getting the information and having the capacity to get people to pay what is due to the government. And that we don't even know how much money the government loses because we don't even know what is being leaked out or what is the answer.
The answer is a capital yes. I am concerned to the point of frustration. Because you see, over time, these systems, some have developed, some have broken down, where all of these things in many areas are taken for granted. And I am not here talking about any specific guilt or innocence of any specific or a particular person. The situation is that you can't have certain kinds of operations and expect a certain kind of result that's different to the operation itself. And that particular matter has been attracting the attention of this cabinet. Let me give you an example. Recently, there was an issue on shortage of red sand. You aware of that? Those red sand quarries, as we mentioned, they are state land. It's state land and the sand is a state asset. And how did the state go about trying to get a taxpayer benefit from operating those quarries? Somewhere along the way, the state entered into arrangements with people to operate these quarries not on the volume of what they produce from the quarry, but on how long they spend in the quarry. So you lease the quarry for a year, but not for paying by the truckload of what you move out. So during the year, you could work night and day and move out as much as is possible to be moved and still operate within the arrangement, because somebody thought that it was a good practice to lease out the quarry for material to be extracted and pay for what period of time you were in the quarry and not how much you remove from the quarry. We just stopped that a month ago. Right? But that was the arrangement. And then I saw yesterday on television a parliamentary committee where it was being admitted that in the sand and gravel, the gravel quarries in the east, where much of the concrete material comes from, it is the quarry operator who tells the ministry what they have produced, and the ministry then will charge a royalty on what they're being told. And I will go further, and I hope it doesn't frighten you. Today at the cabinet, we discussed the finding, the discovery of similar kinds of arrangements in the energy sector, in the export of gas and the production of gas. Some arrangements that we made that have that kind of outcome. And these are things which this government is in the process of reviewing. So it's a very large problem which has been brought into focus by this recent development, but the problem is in fact very real.
So just seeking some clarification. You said you would not deny if someone is your friend and so on. You're glad the opposition leaders are acknowledging you have a friend of a different race. But that being the case, you are confirming the person is your friend?
Of course, I know Mr. Bash very well.
If so, have you had any communication with your friend since you have been aware of this issue of the what is being called the fake oil scandal at Petrotrin?
When I saw that the report, I was abroad, as you know, and it was news to me, right? I should say very shocking news to me. I did call Mr. Bash. I discovered he was abroad, and I, spoke to him in general terms, and of course he has denied it on very firm terms, and I could do no more than that. And it's not something that the cabinet is going to be dealing with, because it has to come to the cabinet in a particular way. I've seen again, and sometimes some of these comments are irresponsible, because we are a country with a lot of schools, 3 universities. We expect a slightly higher level of conversation. That the people who are influencing public opinion, saying that the minister should send in this and the minister should do that, that is precisely what you don't do if you want the thing to be preserved to the point of holding people accountable. The ministry is a monitoring agency. This matter, at this stage, will be a Petrotrin matter. If the minister read that in the newspaper and then send somebody in there, what exactly do you expect to happen? You understand what I mean? We have a functioning company with a functioning board and processes in place. And Petrotrin, that first report said, we are sending it to our audit committee. And Petrotrin kept advising the minister at every step of the way. And there will come a point where person or persons will be held accountable if the information pans out to be correct.
You can say, Prime Minister, that one of the revelations during the Energy GSC Committee or the Public Accounts Committee yesterday on the Energy Ministry was that the PS had said the report that is being circulated in the public domain has not yet reached the ministry. What has reached the ministry was a preliminary report that Petrotrin said is looking into the matter, but the report that has been making the rounds with details in it has not yet reached the ministry.
But you would have seen that the chairman of Petrotrin confirmed that what has been making the rounds is in fact the authentic report. All that means is that the official channels of Petrotrin reporting to the minister is slower than the leak channels to those who have been busting the mark.
Has Mr. Baksh or his company made any financial contribution to the People's National Movement?
I would be surprised if he didn't, because if I have friends and I'm in an election and the PLM is in an election and they didn't contribute, I take a dim view of that. But you can't force anybody to contribute, but sometimes you ask for contribution and you get it. Because elections in this country, for better or worse, are funded by persons who make contributions at election time. That is not news. And this whole fashionable statement of party financier came to the fore when outrageous abuses were observed in the not too distant past. But the business sector has always made contributions to political activity in Trinidad and Tobago. And I don't know that any person should be demonized for doing that. But if you do it and end up in illegal activity, well then, you know, that is a different story. What we have told people when we raise funds for our campaign, and we've run a number of successful campaigns, we've told people very clearly, we're making no deals with anybody. All we guarantee you is good governance and a level playing field. That's all we guarantee.
That the appointment of the Senator, Ms. Alison Baksh, in that context may be that.
No. I said earlier on that I made appointments, all of which were made on the merits of the individual. Ms. Bash is a qualified individual. She took part in our campaign. She's part of our organization, and I don't think that she should be pilloried for anything that doesn't concern her.
In a previous August Prime Minister did pose a question on the issue of campaign finance legislation. Could you give a sense of an update on that as we were discussing this issue just generally?
Well, there are two things that we're working on. One is the whistleblower legislation, which you know this government very early in this term laid in the Parliament, and we sent it to a joint select committee. There are a number of maneuvers taking place in there which have not resulted in it coming back to the floor. It was the government's intention to enact that legislation very quickly, but we have been how should I put it? We have been accommodating certain kinds of maneuvers in the Joint Select Committee, and today at Cabinet, a revised version, having taken into account some considerations of what has gone on in the discussion so far, the Cabinet today has looked at a revised version, and I want to give the country the assurance that very early in the new term, this term ends in a few days, the Parliament will be prorogued, and then we immediately start a new term. Very early in that new term, this government will enact whistleblower legislation in Trinidad and Tobago to protect persons who should and may want to inform about things that the country need to know about, especially in the public sector. And on the question of campaign finance reform, you may recall when I met with the opposition leader a few weeks ago, that was one of the issues I raised. And if you look at what we have done while we were in the opposition, the PNM had been engaged with and engaging the OAS and had participated in exercises in preparation of the PNM bringing to the country for discussion in the first instance campaign finance reform, hopefully to be enacted before the next general election. That's what I told you when I met with the opposition leader the other day, and that's what we are. We have not re-engaged the opposition since then, but it's our intention as we go forward in in months ahead to engage the opposition and the public and have prepared to go to the Parliament with a piece of legislation that will bring us into the modern age. Currently, there is campaign finance on the books, but it's really antiquated. All it says is that a candidate should not spend more than $50,000 on his or her campaign. So all candidates would spend $49,999 on their campaign, and we'll report it to the authorities. But there's no regulation outside of that as to how monies come from, where monies come from, how much money can come, what accountability, what exposure, and so on. So the campaign finance reform discussions will be around that. Because, as I said a while ago, political campaigns in this country are largely funded by contributions, mainly from the private sector or from personal inflow of funds. And those arrangements need to be modernized so that there's transparency in who's doing what, so you don't have to ask, well, who is whose friend and who did what. It would be covered by legislation.
Another update I'm seeking, Prime Minister, on the health condition of Minister Coffey.
Oh yes, we are very concerned that one of our colleagues, Minister of Public Admin and Communication, has suffered a serious medical setback, but his family has informed us. We are in touch with the family on an ongoing basis. Our family has informed us that he's making some progress. I don't want to say satisfactory progress, but I think the family is upbeat that, but he's dealing with a serious medical challenge, which would see him not being able to function in the short term at least. And we are all praying for him and wishing him the best and standing with the family as he tries to pull through this challenge.
What would this mean in terms of the parliamentary caucus? If it is he won't be here in the short term, is it that you'll need to probably have a discussion about what happens? I think in your absence there was an issue with the government being able to vote on an adjournment and so on.
The government has enough seats in the parliament to conduct its business in the absence of one of our members being incapacitated. It would be a bit of a strain on us. I think the portfolio responsibilities of public admin and communication, I may hold on there for a little while and share the burden with our office. The office of Prime Minister will temporarily discharge those responsibilities because we are reluctant to expand the cabinet. Because the country just have to do more with less. So it's going to be more work for us, but the public service structure is in place. So the ministerial structure, we'll try and not expand that and just get the work done. In the short term, I'm not saying that's going to be going on if circumstances change considerably. But at the moment, we're crossing the bridges as we come to them. And the current bridge is standing with the family and rooting for him to get, better. At the constituency level, we'll ensure that the government takes charge to ensure that that constituency is not left. In fact, the constituency might get more attention by so many of us reaching out to ensure that they're looked after. There might be more than one MP looking after their needs at the moment in the short term.
Any confirmation of what the medical challenges, because we're seeing different...
Well, I don't want to get into the details of it. The family speaks for him, and I simply will repeat what the family has said, that he suffered a medical episode. So I don't want to be the detailer of what the episode may or may not be, because I'm not briefed on that. Yes.
Just wanted to return to the issue of the situation at Petrotrin. You said
a little louder, please. A little louder, please.
Just on the issue of your phone call to Mr. Baksh, I'm just wondering whether or not, considering that he is at the center of this investigation right now, no outcomes, yes, but he is, his company and him are being looked at in this internal audit report and this fraud allegation, whether it was appropriate for you to call him.
Of course it's appropriate. I mean, if you have a friend and you hear that, something like that happened, you wouldn't ask him, what's this about? I mean, I couldn't wait to call him to find out what all this is about. I mean, and he said he doesn't know, right? Because he's not aware of it, right? So, I mean, if I have a friend and I'm accused in that way and the friend doesn't reach out to me to find out what's going on, I will kind of look at you kind of funny.
I want to find out, I see the Minister of Finance is here. Anything yet on the budget deal?
The Minister of Finance, we're going to Parliament tomorrow. I think, in normal circumstances, a Minister of Finance probably might choose a time like tomorrow to tell the country when the budget might be. And those are not instructions, right?
We're hearing about a $35 billion budget.
From what so?
From Mariano Brown?
Let's focus on the podium, please.
Okay.
The budget is very close, and I expect that the next day or so, next day or two, the Minister of Finance will be in a position to advise the country, and work is proceeding apace. And it's going to be one of those budgets again where we don't have enough money to meet all our needs, and we have to cut and contrive as we go forward.
Prime Minister, you spoke out last night. It seemed to me that you spoke out against the government borrowing money in order to sustain spending.
Well, it's not a question of speaking out against it. I was speaking to common sense, because I want to bring it, as I think last night bring it down to the household level. If you find yourself with a salary that is considerably reduced, would you embark on a path to keep spending and behaving the same way you would behave when you had the bigger salary? If you do that, how long will you do that for? You will run yourself into bankruptcy and ruin, and might lose your wife and your children. So responsibility now requires that the government and people, not just the government, because the government is simply a body of people who have an assignment in jobs to conduct public business. The people of Trinidad and Tobago and the business of Trinidad and Tobago requires that we don't do that. We cannot borrow to maintain our lifestyle indefinitely. We can borrow strategically to allow us to position ourselves to treat with the challenges. But to borrow to stay comfortable going forward is to fall over a cliff. We have been borrowing. This situation came upon us relatively suddenly in terms of when the actual action took place. There are those who will say that ever since we became an oil-producing country, we should have been putting things aside and should have. But that doesn't help us now. What we're dealing with now is what is in front of us on the table. And we borrowed to try and create a soft landing because we are having to come down from the heights that we were. There are those who tell us just add 2 and 2 and get 4 and dismiss all the others. But every time you say that, whenever I mention a number in money, I want you to see it in people, because that money, whenever it was being spent, it was impacting on the lives of some people. And wherever you don't have money, it means that opportunities for some people would have been eliminated or reduced.
Members of the media, we have time for one more question, and then we have to cut off.
Let's have 2 more. Let's have Joel and Ria. Yes, Joel.
Prime Minister, I was just wondering, as you spoke about LNG earlier, what is the future of Train 1, the negotiation, the supply arrangement for that is due, I think, sometime next year?
Those discussions are still going on, right? But I tell you, the future looks bright. The future looks bright because our gas situation has begun to look a lot better than it looked even 12 months ago. So we still want to, and the resource base has been confirming that we still a gas provenance, and we should still remain a gas marketing country, and therefore the future of Train 1. What we are engaging now is in some discussions with the upstreamers on certain positionings, because frankly, we as a people in Trinidad and Tobago, we are the equivalent to the shareholders of these companies. Those companies have their shareholders, they conduct business in this country, and their shareholders are happy. And the position of this government to those companies is that the people of this country should also be happy with respect to the operations of the hydrocarbon sector. Those discussions are now going on, and there are some very serious matters on the table, because the Minister of Finance will address them in the near future.
Your statement about the hold on job cuts. One of the things that you said is that the government does not want to see, you want to create employment and so on. But people and small businesses are complaining that government contracts are still going to what we call the large or the established contractors, and that small businesses are having a difficult time surviving. That people are saying that there's a virtual ring around those who could make money in this country, and that has fueled this 1% talk. So that what is the government doing to help small businesses and new entrepreneurs to be created?
The government is aware of these allegations, and the government is aware of the operations of the country's business. And none of these things that you're mentioning there are new. Big contracts, and by big contracts you mean contracts of hundreds of millions. Well, I don't know that a complaining small business could take issue with not getting contracts of hundreds of millions. There are contracts which only certain size of businesses can perform and also to get the financial backing to enter the bids. So I don't think we should, I don't know that big contractors are squeezing out small contractors. In fact, we have taken steps to break up big contracts, to allow local contractors to bid. Because what was happening before is that the contracts were so big that only big foreign contractors could have bid. Let's take the Point 14 highway. Over and above the best advice that was given at the time, the last government decided to give the entire highway from Golconda to Point 14 to one contractor. That came to grief, and that contract came to a halt before the government changed. And small local contractors were not being paid, and they were out there in the wilderness. When this government came in, we even had to pay workers. We paid millions of dollars to workers who were not paid by OAS on the Point 14 highway on the contract that had been stopped for reasons of operations of the project. What we have done, we took issue with the bond, and we pulled the bond which secured the government's interest in the contract. And we got almost $1 billion by calling the bonds of the failed contract. Out of that money, under guidance of the court, we were able to pay those workers who OAS didn't pay. You know, you were the media, you remember when the workers used to be making representation? You haven't seen that because this government has paid them. We also broke up this contract into a series of smaller contracts, which for the first time allow local bidders to bid, because it is now within a size that local contractors could manage to perform and to bid on. The first three packages went to local contractors. Last night you would have heard the Minister of Works saying that I think it's 7 other packages went out for bid, and local contractors have bid, and they look quite good in there, and we expect to award those packages to local contractors of small, medium, and probably large contractors. And we'll do that until the highway segments reach Point 14. So it is not correct to say that big contractors are squeezing out small contractors and the government is doing nothing. It's the opposite. The government has done things to allow contractors who didn't even have a chance to bid before to bid now and to win a piece of the contract. And that is how we are proposing the Komuto highway that we are going to turn this out for in a few, Komuto to Manzanilla highway in a few days' time. It's a portion of the road. Before that, there was a proposal to give the whole contract to one contractor. We've broken it into a first phase, which is the phase that is now ready to go forward, and the unready area will not be awarded in that contract. And a lot of local contractors bid on it, and the best bid, after rigorous interrogation, has been awarded to a local contractor. Small contractors are always in the market for these small contracts. And one of the things that will help is our local government reform exercise, which will see local government bodies doing certain things and hiring those small contractors within the borders of those local companies and those local bodies, and encouraging those small contractors to bid within the size and scale of their capacity, both financial and human resource levels. And that will help in giving more opportunities or an ease of opportunity for small contracts. And the medium-sized contractors, it all depends on how nimble they are and how much. And of course, final point, there are some arrangements in place that guarantees that only certain entities, large and established entities, can win bids. Only today, the Cabinet took a decision that the Ministry of Finance will review those evaluation arrangements which cause local, smaller or new entrants to have no chance bidding against the establishment. Because if you apportion points, or a large amount of points, for how long you've been in the business, and how much employees you have, and how many things you did in the last 20 years, then new and smaller entities have no chance in that evaluation process. And that has been going on. And the Ministry of Finance today, Cabinet instructed the Minister of Finance to review those evaluation arrangements, put fairer evaluation yardsticks and templates in place that will govern the evaluation of tenders across the board in the state enterprise sector. That will bring relief to new entities and smaller entities who have been severely disadvantaged by some very skewed evaluation processes which have found their way as practice in the public sector. So, thank you all very much for coming out last night, and thank you very much for coming today, and I hope that we'll be reported in full and as accurately as you always do. Thank you very much.